The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
Tired of it, are you now? Well, Lauren Boebert may sound like she's preaching from outer space, but comments like those are no longer fringe in the Republican Party. As the New York Times points out, the religious right has long supported conservative causes, but this current wave seeks more. A nation that actively prioritizes their particular set of Christian beliefs and far-right views, and that more openly embraces Christianity as a bedrock identity. And while it may seem new, it is an effort that has been underway for decades. A former leader of an evangelical group has said that he recruited and coached wealthy volunteers to wine, dine, and entertain conservative Supreme Court justices while pushing conservative positions on abortion, homosexuality, gun restrictions, and other issues. That group became a part of the Liberty Council, whose chairman told Politico that he knows of nothing like that happened in the past. The group is also facing additional scrutiny after their vice president, Peggy Neighbor, was recorded by a live streamer, self-described as an independent journalist, saying she has prayed with the justices.
I run a ministry behind the court.
Oh, you have a church behind the court? Can I have your card?
It's not really a church, we're a ministry center, but we're justices.
Wow, what does that mean? You pray with the justices?
Yes, we're the only people that do that.
The woman speaking did not know she was being recorded at the time. She originally denied to Rolling Stone magazine that she had made those comments, but after their story was published, Neighbor acknowledged her remarks and conceded she has prayed personally with Supreme Court justices. But despite speaking in the present tense on the live stream, Neighbor asserted my comment was referring to past history and not practice of the past several years. The Supreme Court did not respond to a request for comment, and the Liberty Council's founder, Matt Staver, strenuously denied that the in-person ministering to justices that Neighbor bragged about exists. But the influence the group has over the court is undeniable. In the justice's decision overturning Roe v. Wade, the majority cited an amicus brief from the Liberty Council that made the ludicrous argument that abortion supporters have been motivated by a desire to suppress the size of the African-American population. With me now, Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation, and Robert Jones, president and founder of the Public Religion Research Institute and author of White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. It is great to see you both. Robert, I am familiar with the Liberty Council. They go back a long way to a lot of fights, including over gay marriage and same-sex marriage and abortion and even those monuments in front of federal buildings. How influential are they, and does it surprise you that they may be directly ministering to Supreme Court justices?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I think we've seen efforts like this, and very deliberate efforts, I should say. These are programs stood up to kind of go into this kind of influence. What's really troubling to me is the use of prayer clearly for political influence here. If you think about prayer, there's this adage I grew up with, the family that prays together stays together, right? And that's because prayer creates a kind of intimate connection of inviting the divine into a human relationship. And it basically says we're on God's side together. And it's only a half step from that to saying God's on our side, right? And I think that's what I find so deeply troubling about this and connected to an organization that's also filing amicus briefs with the Supreme Court, and one that, as you say, is cited, making this kind of outlandish accusation about eugenics being involved in motivating supporters of abortions. There's a kind of clear, link here, and I think this is deeply troubling. And this connection between the conservative justices here, it certainly makes you recoil a bit and think, okay, well, this is really this use of public prayer for power and influence in the highest court of the land and unelected positions that are lifetime appointments.
And Ellie, it's not all religions that they're talking about, the use of prayer. Lots of different religions pray. But this Supreme Court has seemed to side very specifically with one religion, right-wing Christian religion, not even just regular Christianity, just a very specific kind. And they've ruled for them almost all the time. I think their success rate is something like in the 80% range. Pro-religious outcomes in Supreme Court cases under John Roberts, it is at 83%. Even under Rehnquist, who was a far-right guy, it was 58%. That is where we are, Ellie. It is not all religion. There are not a lot of outcomes for Judaism or, for Hinduism. It's all for right-wing Christianity.
Yeah, they don't really need to bring in outside groups to pray because the zealots are already on the Supreme Court, right? The call is coming in from inside the House. And if you go back to the Dobbs decision, people need to understand that the premise that life begins at conception is an overtly religious belief. It is a Christian fundamentalist belief. It is not shared by many people of the Jewish faith. It is not shared by many people of the Islamic faith or the Hindu faith or the Buddhist faith or any of these other faiths that make up our country. We have tried doing the New World the way Lauren Boebert suggests. You know where that got us? To the witch trials. You know what happened? People died. But with this court, we are not far away from that again. We are not far away from one of these Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene type people saying, I saw Goody Mistal speaking with the devil and helping women across the border. Like that is where they are going with all of this. And it's not just Dobbs. It is a slew of cases that they issued last term that pokes holes in the separation of church and state and allows for the government to establish Christian theocracy over all else.
And the thing is, Robbie, I'm not a lawyer, but even just reading as a layperson, the decision that Alito wrote, it's rife with references to old sort of Christian barristers and things and ideas that, to Ellie's point, that really strike me as very uniquely far right-wing Christian ideas, because even sort of the mild, Christians don't believe this stuff. And it is frightening to think that you do have a court that is deciding what is constitutional based on their religious beliefs rather than on the law and the Constitution. And to go a little further in the politics as well. This is a guy named Doug Mastriano who's running for the United States Senate right now. And he said this in Pennsylvania. The separation of church and state was a myth, he said. In November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so. As Mastriano victory at a victory on primary night, he said, if I read articles where you're attacking Christians and painting us as in a particular picture that's hateful or intolerant, we won't have the time of day for you, blah, 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 blah. But he agrees with Boebert, and they're saying that there is no separation of church and state, but they're church and state.
Yeah, that's right. I think we're hearing, this kind of quiet part out loud being shouted from the rooftops here. And it's, we see it in the data, too, in our public opinion data. So, for example, when we ask whether people envision this country as a promised land for European Christians who could set an example for the rest of the world, like that very white Christian nationalist idea, ask it that specifically, we have a majority of white evangelicals saying, yes, that is the vision of the country that I have. When we ask them about, a kind of ideal era in the country, they kind of agree with the court here. The court's conservative majority. They tell us, for example, 70% of Republicans, 2/3 of white evangelicals say that things have changed for the worse since the 1950s, right? And that's really what we have here is this kind of nostalgia-fueled gambit to drag the country back 70 years, right? It's before Roe, it's before Brown, it's before the Civil Rights Act, it's before the Voting Rights Act. It is into the early 1950s. That vision is one that people are telling us on public opinion surveys is one that they actually endorse. And you see it in the opinion. One more point here, that it wasn't just abortion. It wasn't just school prayer that got attacked. It was the right to privacy in the 14th Amendment. And it was the actual underlying premise of the separation of church and state. And in its place in both accounts, what I think is most dangerous is that the support substituted for each of those things this idea of history and tradition. They explicitly say, and they locate history and tradition in somewhere before the latter part of the 20th century. They explicitly say that in the decision. And that's what we're really looking at, is that's the America that's in that vision.
Public Religion Research Institute is, to me, the greatest polling institute in the world, but I will make one suggestion. Ask them about the 1850s, because, ask about that. Because, to Ellie, the thing that they're going back to is really the 1850s, not the 1950s. I mean, the time that people couldn't have abortions, it was because black women were bearing property, and you couldn't abort that because it was a property crime. And black women who were midwives were taking midwifery work away from white midwives. And so that was a later era of saying that. So even the racial arguments are steeped in a 19th century sort of nostalgia. I want to ask you, comment on that, but also just on the upcoming stuff that they've got. They've got affirmative action coming where they're probably going to have Ketanji Brown. She probably will recuse because she's a good person who sticks up for what she claims she's going to do. But you've got affirmative action, you've got voting rights, you've got the Clean Water Act. All of that is steeped in some Christian lore.
Yeah, look, the colonizers came with the rod and the Bible and used both as they were going around the world subjugating people, right? So this is nothing new in terms of their sectarian ideology, right? The problem that you have is that when you set these Christian theocrats upon the court to do one thing, that one thing was to eat Roe v. Wade. It's like an invasive species, right? Once you set them loose, they don't stop feeding just because they got the one thing they were set to do. And so what we're going to see next term is this court continue to feed on vulnerable people, on minorities, on non-Christians. Look, there's nothing in the Supreme Court decisions that allow a football coach to lead students in prayer, lead players in prayer, that tells me they're going to allow a Muslim school teacher to pray 5 times a day towards Mecca. Yeah. That's that point about history and tradition. It's only kind of white Christian history and tradition that they are, again, trying to impose on the rest of us against our will.
And I'm going to note that Clarence Thomas will probably not recuse on the other case that's coming up about whether they can legally do the insurrection. You shouldn't be able to predict the way a Supreme Court is going to rule based on what right-wing Christians poll in Robbie's poll. If they like it, they're going to rule for it. But now you can. Elie Mystal, Robert Jones, thank you both very much. We'll be right back.